And welcome back to 12 Steps to Poker Heaven. I'm Carmel and I'm here with our poker expert, Mr. Grub Smith.
Hey, Carmel.
Hey, Grub. Now, in part one, we talked about the psychology of poker.
We did indeed, getting inside your opponent's head and putting up a fortress around your own so that he can't read your mind.
And now we're going to talk about the non-psychological poker strategy, a little something called pot odds.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is maths time, but don't worry, Carmel, it's not complicated and it is vital to your skill and development as a poker player. Before we talk about pot odds, though, we have to grasp the concept of expected value. That's whether certain cards and certain situations will make you a profit or a loss in the long run. Let's take roulette as an example. Now, on an English roulette table, there are 37 slots in the wheel, 1 to 36 in the numbers, and the 0, which gives the house its edge. You get paid, though, at 35 to 1. If you put £1 on black number 20, you'll get back £35 plus your original stake. Briefly, expected value means that you take every possible outcome and multiply it by the probability of that outcome happening, then you add them together. For instance, if you bet £1 on a roulette wheel, you'd expect to lose 36 times out of 37, and to win only 1 time in 37. However, as you're only getting paid at 35 to 1, you're guaranteed to lose in the long term. In fact, as you can see from the calculations, the casino's edge is 0.027, which means that the pound in your pocket is effectively only worth about 97p if you're foolish enough to stand near that roulette wheel long enough.
But Grub, no one can really work out expected value at a table.
You're right, you don't want to sit there with a calculator working things out to 2 decimal points. On the internet, oddly enough, you can download programs which will do it for you, but most people like to play their cards with their friends and they don't want to be making big calculations and scratching their head for 10 minutes. What you have to do is have a grasp of the odds and expected value. You've got to know which ones are going to pay you the most. And you can learn the situations where you're going to need to apply pot odds. Usually it's when you're chasing a flush, trying to draw to an inside or an up and down straight draw, or trying to hit an overcard. So it sounds complicated, but I promise you it isn't. There's a limited way it can be applied, and once you've done the basics, you'll find it flows pretty normally. It's like learning a foreign language. At the beginning, you think, I'm never going to learn all these words, but you do it for a week or two, and suddenly you're talking like a native.
Makes sense. So, Grub, you've explained expected value to us. Can you now explain pot odds?
I can. It's a crucial part of the game. Essentially, you've got to think of the difference between being a bookmaker, someone who drives home in a Rolls-Royce, smoking a big cigar and counting their fivers, and being a punter, someone with a roll-up cigarette going home in a clapped-out Vauxhall. Because bookmakers usually make bets when they've got the advantage with the odds. And punters, I'm afraid, usually make bets when they've got the disadvantage. In poker, this happens a lot. So let's take an example. You've got to the end of the hand, somebody's bet £10, there's now £40 in the pot. You've got to play £10 to call. Now, if your odds of winning the hand are better than 4 to 1, then you should take the bet, because you're going to make money in the long term. And if they're worse, you should avoid it, because you're going to lose money. Sure, you might get lucky every now and then, but in the long term, if you make mug bets, you're going to lose money. Now, let's give an example of how this works. Let's do a flush draw. Let's say you've got the ace of spades and the 3 of spades in your hand, and it comes down in the middle, king of spades, jack of spades, 4 of hearts. You've got a flush draw. Any spade on the board will give you the nut flush and probably the winning hand. This is the hard version. It might look like something that only a boffin can understand, but I promise you it gets easier. We start with probability. Well, in this circumstance, that is 1 minus your non-outs over the unseen cards times your non-outs minus 1 over the unseen cards minus 1. Now, your outs are the cards that in this case will give you the nut flush, and there are 9 spades still undetected. Your non-outs, well, that's 52 cards in the deck, minus the 13 spades and the 4 of hearts we can see up there. That means there are 38 cards that are going to miss your hand. The unseen cards, well, that is 52 minus 5, those are the 5 we can see, your 2 whole cards on the flop, and that gives us 47. So if we crunch these numbers, we can see that gives you a 0.35 or a 35% chance of making the nut flush, which is odds of 1.86 to 1. But before you start reaching for your calculator and thinking you're going to have to be Einstein to be good at poker, don't panic. Here's the simple way of doing it. To work out your probability, you simply multiply your number of outs, in this case 9, by the number of cards to come times 2. So in this case, the turn and the river, that's 2 cards, times 2 is 4. The number of outs that give me the flush is 9. The number of cards left to come is 2. So 9 times 2 times 2 is 36, which is roughly 2 to 1. And for our poker playing terms, that is close enough to make a good informed decision. Now, if someone bets there and you're getting better than 2 to 1 from the pot, let's say you've got to put 100 in to win 400, it's a no-brainer. Of course, you make that call. But if you're having to put 100 in to win 110, you're not getting the odds. So again, you've got to think on your feet, work out the odds, and as I said about learning a foreign language, once you've got this concept in your head, essentially multiply by the number of cards left to come, by the number of outs you have, and then multiply that by 2. That's your pot odds, and it's pretty simple.
Now let's look at an example of pot odds from the British Poker Open 2006.
The blinds are at 2,000 and 4,000 in this heat. Noah Boakin folds, and we are round to Gus Hansen. The Great Dane has picked up the king and 9 of spades.
To raise to 12,000 top. 12,000 to play, George.
Round to George Fraser on the button. He has found an ace-7 offsuit, makes the call.
Pass.
Gary Jones, the choir boy, gets out of the way.
8,000 more,
And that only leaves John Gale, bracelet winner in the World Series.
And raise.
And with ace-10 offsuit, he's making a raise, pushing it up to 33,000. So that is now 21,000 more to Gus and George.
21,000 more, Gus.
Gus giving him a beady glare, toying with his chips as he makes a calculation. He has to put 21,000 more into the pot, but there is over 50,000 in there, and Gus has certainly played worse cards than this. So I expect him to push the chips over the white line. Does nothing in a hurry, Gus. That's why he's one of the best players in the world. Always thinks through every action, not just from this hand, but from every hand he's seen John Gale play.
Cool.
He makes the call.
21,000
And now George Fraser, well, taps his fingers on the table, checks his cards to make sure they haven't turned into aces. One of them is, and he may fancy he's got a puncher's chance with that ace. 21,000 with 80,000 in the middle. He decides that is a worthy investment, so we'll go to a flop. The pot size now 101,000, and our flop comes down. 8 of spades, 5 of spades, Jack of diamonds. Well, that does give Gus the flush draw, but it's going to be Gale to act first. He has really missed this by a country mile, but he pops in 25,000 to find out where he is. Now, Gus's pot odds, with 126,000 in the pot, are 126,000 divided by the 25,000 he's being asked to bet. That's 5.4, roughly 5 to 1, and he decides that's good enough. Now remember, the odds of him hitting that flush are roughly 2 to 1. He's getting 5 to 1 from the pot. He's made a positive pot odds call. He could win it now if the other two fold, but if one of them calls, he'll have a very decent chance of making that flush and cleaning up by winning with the best hand. Gus has 2 spades in his hand. There are 2 on the board and an unconnected card. That means there are 47 cards unaccounted for left in the deck. Now, 38 of those cards would lose Gus 25,000 chips were he to call John Gale.